Imagine you're walking across an empty field. Nothing changes. Same grass beneath your feet, same sky overhead, same landscape stretching out in every direction. Then you cross an invisible line. And suddenly, you're in another country. Different laws govern what you can do. A different government claims authority over you. A different flag represents you. Sometimes even a different language surrounds you. A different currency in your pocket. An invisible line in an empty field just changed almost everything about your life. So here's the question that should be bothering you right now. Why? Why can a line that doesn't physically exist change so much? Why do billions of people organize their entire lives around something you literally cannot see? Why do nations exist at all? Let's start with something obvious that stops being obvious the moment you think about it. What is a nation? Look at Earth from space. You won't see borders. Astronauts have noted this for decades. From orbit, there are no lines, no walls separating most countries, no visible markings in the landscape. Borders aren't mountains. They aren't rivers. Most of the time, they're not anything at all. And yet, billions of people structure their entire existence around them. Cross one and your rights change. The laws that apply to you change. Your legal citizenship changes. In many cases, the language people speak around you changes, the money you're allowed to use changes, and the government that can imprison you changes. All because you walked across something you couldn't see. Which forces the question, if a nation isn't a physical object, if you can't point to it, weigh it, or see it from space, then what exactly is it? Hold that question. We'll come back to it. Here's something that might surprise you. Nations are new. Not just relatively new, shockingly new given the scale of human history. For the vast majority of human existence, people didn't live in nations. They lived in tribes, clans, villages, eventually city-states and kingdoms, but even those were fundamentally different from what we now call a nation. Think about how a medieval peasant understood their world. They didn't think of themselves as French or English in the way we use those words today. They thought of themselves as members of a family, followers of a religion, subjects of a local lord, inhabitants of a specific village. Their identity was small, immediate, and personal. The modern nation-state, a government claiming to represent a unified people with a shared identity, is a few hundred years old at most. In Europe, the concept took real shape in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. In much of the world, it arrived even later, often through colonization and its aftermath. Which raises an obvious question. If nations are this recent, if humans spent most of their history without them, why did they appear at all? What problem were they solving? To understand that, you have to understand the scale of the challenge rulers faced as societies grew. Picture Europe before the rise of modern nations. Hundreds of competing kingdoms, nobles with local loyalties, towns with their own laws, villages where people's entire sense of reality ended at the tree line. Now imagine you're a ruler trying to govern not a village, not a town, but millions of people spread across vast distances. People who have never met each other. People who share no obvious reason to trust each other or cooperate with each other. You need those people to pay taxes to fund an army they may never see. You need them to follow laws written by people they've never met. You need them to fight wars for territory they may never visit. You need them to build roads, bridges, and infrastructure that others will use more than they will. And crucially, you need them to do all of this willingly, or at least compliantly, because you can't station a guard next to every citizen at every moment. So here's the real problem that rulers and states faced. How do you get millions of strangers to cooperate with each other? How do you make people who have nothing personally in common feel connected enough to sustain a shared society? Force alone doesn't scale. Surveillance alone doesn't scale. Something else was needed. What governments discovered, gradually through trial and error across centuries, is that force is a weak foundation for mass cooperation. What actually works is identity. People don't sacrifice for governments. They don't pay taxes or fight wars or follow rules because of bureaucratic institutions. They do those things for communities they believe they belong to. So governments began building those communities. Not physically. Culturally, they standardized languages, picking one dialect and spreading it through schools until strangers from opposite ends of a country could talk to each other. They created national holidays that gave millions of people a shared calendar of memory. They invented flags, simple symbols that could travel anywhere and instantly signal membership. They wrote national histories, stories that made scattered, different people feel like chapters in the same longbook. They built national education systems that, generation by generation, taught children not just mathematics and reading, but who they were, which nation they belonged to, which heroes they shared, which story they were part of. And it worked. Not because it was deceptive, because it answered a genuine human need. People need to belong to something larger than themselves. The nation became a story big enough to hold millions of strangers inside it, and make them feel, despite never meeting, that they were somehow connected. The question is, why did this become one of the most powerful forces in human history? Think about what the nation actually enabled. Before strong national identities, a farmer and a merchant in distant provinces had no particular reason to see themselves as part of the same collective. No reason to fund each other's roads, no reason to defend each other's borders, no reason to follow the same laws. After national identity took hold, they did. Not because their material interests obviously aligned, because they believed they belonged to the same story, and that belief unlocked something extraordinary. Larger, more stable governments became possible. Bigger economies, because trade could happen more freely within national borders under shared legal frameworks. Mass cooperation at a scale that would have been impossible through personal relationships alone. Infrastructure, railways, postal systems, public schools, national militaries, that required millions of contributors to build and sustain. The nation solved what you might call the stranger cooperation problem. It created a framework in which people would extend trust, follow rules, and make sacrifices for people they'd never met and would never meet. It became arguably the most successful organizational technology in human history. Which brings us to the uncomfortable question lurking underneath all of this. Is a nation actually real? Here's where it gets philosophically interesting. What is a nation actually made of? Not soil? Soil exists whether or not a nation claims it. Not borders. Lines on maps existed before the nations that drew them and will exist after they're redrawn. Not buildings or roads or infrastructure. Those are physical objects. They'd still stand if the nation vanished. A nation exists because people collectively believe it exists. Take that belief away. They strip it from enough people simultaneously, and watch what happens. The flag is still there, but it's just cloth. The passport is still there, but it's just paper with printing on it. The border is still there, but it's just a coordinate on a map. The physical objects remain. The offices, the documents, the uniforms, all still present. But the nation is gone, because the nation was never in the objects. It was in the belief, which raises the obvious, slightly destabilizing conclusion. Does that mean nations are fake? No. But here's the right way to think about what nations actually are. Money solved a problem. Before money existed, trading with strangers was nearly impossible. If you had grain and needed shoes, you had to find someone who had shoes and wanted grain and was available right now. That coincidence was rare. Commerce was slow. Civilization stayed small. Money broke the constraint. It allowed strangers to exchange value without any prior relationship. A farmer and a cobbler who'd never met could cooperate, not because they trusted each other, but because they shared a system. Nations solved the same kind of problem, but instead of coordinating the exchange of value, they coordinated something harder: loyalty. Think about what a nation actually asks of you. Follow laws written by people you've never met. Pay taxes that fund services for strangers you'll never know. In some cases, risk your life defending borders you've never seen. That's a transaction. Diffuse, deferred, anonymous, but a transaction. And in return, strangers follow the same laws that protect you, fund the roads you use, defend the borders that shelter you. Money allows strangers to exchange value. Nations allow strangers to exchange loyalty. Both invented, both real, both producing consequences that are entirely concrete. Roads, armies, courts, economies, lives. So step back and consider what that actually means. Human civilization is built almost entirely from things that don't exist in nature. Go into a forest and look for money. It isn't there. Look for laws. Look for borders. Look for corporations or constitutions or governments. None of them. The natural world contains soil, water, trees, animals, but not a single one of the institutions that governs almost every aspect of your life. Every structure that determines where you can go, what you're allowed to do, what you trade your labor for, what language your children learn, was invented by specific people at specific moments in history to solve specific problems. Money, laws, corporations, nations, none of them natural, all of them real. And here's what's worth carrying forward from that. When you look at any of these systems, when you ask how they work, what they're made of, why they exist, the answer is almost always the same. Someone faced a problem that strangers needed to solve together, and they built something. A nation may look like a line on a map, but it's really a solution, a technology, one of thousands of invisible structures holding civilization together. Once you see that, once you understand that the world around you was mostly built, not found, you start looking at everything differently. Not just nations, everything.